Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Side Projects. This one is all about the 5 strangest places on Earth, so let's just jump into these strange places, shall we? The world is full of bizarre, enigmatic, and downright strange places. While some are man-made, others are entirely natural. Many are shrouded in myth and mystery, while others are easily explained by history and science. Honestly, everything is explained by history and science eventually, when we understand it. Either way, like beauty, strangeness is in the eye of the beholder. Although, I think everyone will agree that the ones today, pretty odd. Perched atop a 4,700 feet peak in the rugged central Bulgarian mountains, approximately 100 miles east of the capital city of Sofia, an unusual flying saucer-like architectural oddity harkens back to an era long past. This is for sure going to be a communist monument because the communists built a load of weird monuments. Some of them have been torn down, some of them still exist. They're almost exclusively all weird. Built by the communists? Big brain. During the height of the Cold War, the Buzz Ludza Monument was constructed to commemorate the country's troubled history and promising communist future. Though the site was how did that work out for you? Though the site was largely chosen for its dramatic splendor, it was also the location of an epic battle between Bulgarians and Turks in the late 1860s. Perhaps for inspiration, a few decades later in 1891, along with a tight-knit group of like-minded political visionaries, Dimitar Blagalev, philosopher and founder of the country's left-wing political movement, made a pilgrimage to the site to plot a course for the small Balkan nation. But it wouldn't be until more than 8 decades later, long after Blagoev's death, that construction got underway in January of 1974. Civilian engineers, surveyors, carpenters, and masons contributed to the project, but much of the labor was provided by the Bulgarian army. First, to create a stable and level base, the peak's rounded top was blasted away with tens of thousands of pounds of dynamite. That is pretty cool. All told, the process shortened the mountain by more than 30 feet and removed nearly 15,000 cubic meters of rock. The monument's design was the brainchild of Georgy Stoilov, a former mayor of Sofia and co-founder of Bulgaria's Union of Architects. Composed of a flattened sphere resting on a relatively small angular base with a narrow spire in the back, at its tallest point, the futuristic monument reaches nearly 250 feet into the Bulgarian sky. The interior walls are adorned with intricate mosaics spread over nearly 11,000 square feet, most of which depict decisive moments in Bulgarian history. And not surprisingly, the central mosaic features a hammer and sickle and the following phrase from the Communist Manifesto: "Proletarians of all countries, unite." Together, the mosaics contain more than 10 tons of colorful ceramic and cobalt glass and polished riverstones from all over the country. Though they're both long gone in its heyday, immense images of Marx and Lenin loomed over the central arena as well, which often hosted official functions and celebrations. After the fall of Bulgaria's communist regime in the late 1980s, all maintenance on the facility ground to a halt, and now, thanks to weather and vandalism, much of the interior is in total ruin, though the structure itself has stood the test of time. The monument came with an inflation-adjusted price tag of more than $40 million. A renewed interest in the country's history and architecture has led to recent preservation efforts, the ultimate goal of which is to not only restore the icon to its former glory, but to turn it into a museum and interpretive center. Well, good. It's better to be a museum than, monument to the glory of communism. Hastened by a burgeoning population, limited space, and public health issues caused by traditional burial methods, in the mid-1700s, Parisian authorities made the decision to empty urban cemeteries and transfer the remains into an underground site just outside the city limits. The new site for the unorthodox mass burial would be a network of mines that had been conveniently excavated in the 14th and 15th centuries and that had lay abandoned for centuries. The extensive 2,000-acre labyrinth of subterranean caves, caverns, and passageways was just the solution that the city needed for its dead body problem. Preparing the site and organizing the transfer of bones was entrusted to Shah AXEL GUILLAUMOT, a well-respected inspector for the Department of General Quarry Inspection. Officially decreed by Louis XVI in early April of 1771, the new department's first order of business was to shore up the abandoned quarries, many of which had collapsed and were filled with water. But the first mass excavation at the Saint-Innocent Cemetery, Paris's oldest, wouldn't begin until the mid-1780s, just a few years after it had reached maximum capacity after nearly 1,000 years of perpetual use. Tombs and common graves were emptied of their macabre contents, and workers began the arduous and grisly task of transporting them to their new homes, a job commonly done under the cover of darkness to avoid the prying and often accusatory eyes of the general population. Many of the bones, especially those of lower-class citizens, were unceremoniously dumped into quarry pits, then distributed and piled into galleries by workers below. The mammoth undertaking continued up until the French Revolution in May of 1789, although it stopped in 1800, after which it continued well into the middle of the 19th century as one phase of a massive urban renovation. The new site became the Paris Municipal Ossuary in April of 1786, and from then forward became known simply as the Catacombs. Starting in 1809, portions of the catacombs were open to the public on a limited basis, but though rumors had spread beforehand, many first-time visitors were surprised to find not just indiscriminate piles of bones, but eerie decorative displays and structural elements like pillars and walls made with femurs, spines, pelvises, and skulls. Dark. Notable guests included European royalty, famous musicians and actors, and even Napoleon III, who visited with his son in 1860. Over the years, the ossuary became the final resting place for numerous historical figures, many of whom lost their heads, quite literally, during the Revolution, including lawyer, statesman, and all-round rabble-rouser Maximilien Robespierre and Antoine Lavoisier, the father of modern chemistry. Other, even more grotesque tales were common too, like of hospital worker Philibert Aspairt, who entered the catacombs in 1793 and never reappeared above ground. Despite multiple searches, his body remained hidden in an obscure tunnel until more than a decade later, and ironically, his final resting place was just a few meters from an exit that would have taken him to safety. It's estimated that the Paris catacombs hold the remains of nearly 6 million Parisians, but some claim the number is much higher. Also known as the Slabs, Slab City is an unincorporated 630-plus acre plot of rugged and remote Sonoran desert in Southern California's Imperial County. Located near the eastern shore of the slowly evaporating Salton Sea, Slab City is approximately 100 miles northeast of San Diego and 170 miles southeast of Los Angeles, and it has been attracting introverts, misfits, artists, and free spirits more than 7 decades. Named after the abundant concrete slabs that were previously foundations of buildings on the Marine Corps' Camp DUNLAP training facility before and during World War II, Slab City was built as a practice range for artillery and anti-aircraft gunners, most of whom were flown in from San Diego, less than an hour away by transport plane. The camp was officially commissioned in mid-October of 1942 after more than 2 years of construction, and at its peak it was a self-sufficient desert town with paved roads, water and sewage systems, barracks, a mess hall, and officers' quarters. It operated during the war and for 3 years after, and though it wasn't officially closed, dismantled, and abandoned until 1956, it had been staffed by a skeleton crew for years before that. As of October 6, 1961, a quitclaim deed was issued by the Department of Defense which transferred ownership of the land to the state of California, since neither the base or the land were needed, but the deed didn't include any restrictions, clauses, or provisions for things like remediation or restoration. The Marine Corps did have all of the buildings removed, leaving behind little more than useless building materials and the slabs themselves. At first, it was settled by veterans who'd gotten out of the service, most of whom had worked or been stationed there. But though the first residents were recreational vehicle owners, ex-Leathernecks, pilots, and RV-loving snowbirds looking for a little temporary peace and quiet not too far from the glitz, glamour, and amenities of Palm Springs, with each passing decade, Slab City grew, and by the late 90s, many of its residents were anarchists, drug addicts, mentally unstable, and fugitives from the law. In fact, between the mid and late 80s, the winter population grew nearly threefold, thanks largely to an article published in Trailer Life, an RV magazine, in 1984. In recent years, it has been estimated that in the winter, the population often exceeds 4,000 people, while during the harsh summer months, when water is scarce and temperatures hover in the hundreds, it dwindles to less than 200 diehards with nowhere else to go and no way to get there. Eccentric characters and epic works of unclassifiable street art are in no short supply in Slab City, one of the most colorful being a work built by Leonard Knight called Salvation Mountain that took more than 3 decades to build. Made from bricks, concrete, auto parts, discarded construction materials, and thousands of gallons of colorful paint, it's a Christian-themed mountain of love that's been lauded as an American icon of folk art. A number of movies have been filmed on site over the years, including the 2007 blockbuster hit Into the Wild starring Emil Hirsch. A 2018 article in Smithsonian Magazine called Slab City one of America's last free places. The The Waitomo glowworm caves, and I apologize for pronunciation on that one. Waitomo's not in my little pronunciation dictionary, so I'm just guessing. But maybe I get it right. Let me know, New Zealand folks. They're famous for their ARACHNOCAMPA luminosa, a species of light-producing worms found exclusively in New Zealand. Other plants and animals like mushrooms, pigmentless ants, and supersized crickets also reside in the primordial caverns, which sound terrifying. Supersized crickets. But it's the shimmering worms that draw visitors from all over the globe. Though adult glowworms are no larger than a typical mosquito, they excrete long strands of gooey mucus that often hang down more than a meter from the cave ceilings, like translucent icicles, or more accurately, fishing lines, because they ensnare flying insects on which the worms feed. Both the worms and their secretions produce vibrant turquoise and blue light via a chemical process called bioluminescence, and set above the backdrop of the dark caves, they often resemble views of the aurora borealis or the sky in Van Gogh's Starry Night. In the indigenous Maori language, Waitomo is a conjunction of the words for water and hole or shaft, but though Waitomo is the most famous, it's just one of a network of 4 interlocking cave complexes connected by an underground streamway, much of which is inaccessible. In fact, over the last 30 million years, volcanic activity has created approximately 300 individual limestone caves in the region, and geologists suspect that there could be hundreds more. When the caves were first formed, much of modern-day New Zealand was actually below the ocean. Over time, massive limestone formations grew as the remains of marine organisms collected and fossilized on the seafloor, in some areas reaching 650 feet thick. Later, the caves formed when shifting tectonic plates caused the limestone to buckle under the tremendous pressure, creating fissures that eroded over millennia. The Waitomo caves are filled with stalactites and stalagmites that also formed over millions of years as mineral-rich water dripped from the ceiling and slowly calcified. When stalactites and stalagmites meet in the middle, they're called pillars, and occasionally they twist around one another in dramatic structures called halicti. Not surprisingly, the Maori knew of these caves' existence long before they were officially discovered by British surveyors in the mid-1880s. As early as the 19th century, the locals admitted visitors and provided a guide service for a small fee. The government repeatedly attempted to purchase the caves for years, but eventually resorted to using a number of environmental and public work acts in the early 20th century to take ownership, reimbursing the Maori the princely sum of £625, or about $23,000 today. Composed of nearly 40,000 interlocking basalt pillars that burst through the Earth's crust nearly 60 million years ago, the Giant's Causeway in County Antrim, Northern Ireland is a sight to behold. During the Paleocene epoch, Antrim was prone to intense seismic and volcanic activity that often resulted in molten basalt extruding through the area's abundant chalk beds, which over time created the THULEAN Plateau. As the magma cooled, it also contracted, causing both horizontal and perpendicular fracturing. The former created the causeway's pillars, while the latter gave rise to flat structures known as biscuits. Though most columns are hexagonal, others are square, pentagonal, and octagonal, the majority of which are approximately 40 feet tall. Some are grouped together in clusters that can be nearly 100 feet thick, the most dramatic resembling staircases that gradually slope and disappear beneath the ancient sea. Putting science aside, according to local law, the columns are ruins from a massive freeway built by giants. As the story goes, Irish colossus Finn McCool was challenged to a fight by a Scottish giant named Benandona. He accepted and immediately set about building a causeway over the Northern Channel between the two countries to facilitate their meeting. One version of the tale has Fionn defeating Benandona, but another has Fionn's wife hiding him in a crib like a baby to prevent his demise. Upon seeing the oversized baby, Benandona realizes the father must be of epic proportions, and he makes a quick escape over the causeway, destroying it as he goes to prevent Fionn from following and killing him. Across the sea at FINGAL'S cave on the Scottish Isle of Staffa, there are similar basalt columns which most likely influence the unique creation story. Giant's Causeway gained UNESCO World Heritage Site status in 1986 and is widely considered one of the United Kingdom's most impressive natural wonders, though some naysayers still claim that it's a man-made structure. They are wrong. The site is owned and managed by the country's National Trust and, before COVID, drew nearly 1 million visitors annually. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do smash that like button below. Look, if you've got a suggestion for a future side products video, if you're watching this and being like, Simon, why haven't you covered XYZ yet? Well, let me know what XYZ is in the comments below, and thank you for watching.